The millionaire had taken her mute daughter to the playground and froze when a black man made her speak for the first time. Patricia Whitmore's shrill voice cut to the morning air at the exclusive Meadowbrook Hills playground as she screamed for Victoria Richardson to get her daughter away from Marcus Thompson, a 35-year-old black man who was crouching next to little Emma Richardson. For the first time in 3 years, the child had uttered a single word, hello, and Victoria stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Since the accident had killed Emma's father, the girl had lived in silence despite years of therapy and specialists, and now before complete strangers she had broken that silence. Patricia leaned and whispered with a conspiratorial edge that this was not the kind of man Victoria's daughter should be seen with, not here in their playground, asking what kind of example she was setting. Marcus rose slowly with dirt still on his hands from the garden where he worked as a landscaper, his eyes meeting Victoria's with a calm that unsettled her, because it was not anger or shame, but an unshakable composure of someone who had faced judgment many times before. "Mommy, he heard me, Emma," whispered her voice fragile but clear. "He really heard me." Victoria felt her throat tighten. She would pour millions into technology and treatment that failed to unlock her daughter's voice now saw a gardener succeed in 2 minutes. Patricia demanded that Emma come home at once, but the girl stood firm staring at Marcus, who simply smiled kindly and packed away his tools. "Thank you," Emma said again, louder this time. Marcus nodded and told her to keep using her beautiful voice, then turned to Victoria with a respectful bow before limping away, his arms marked with scars that spoke of battles endured. Patricia sneered that people like him always sought to take advantage, but Victoria could not look away from him disappearing through the gate, because her daughter had spoken after 1,995 days, and she had spoken to him, the man their community treated as invisible. Victoria knew now that there were mysteries before her. Why Emma spoke to Marcus, and why he carried an aura of secrets larger than any gardener's life could suggest. The following Monday, Marcus came to work as usual long before dawn with his toolbox and thermos of black coffee, only to find a warning letter pinned to the gate accusing him of inappropriate behavior with minors and threatening dismissal, signed by Patricia Whitmore herself. He folded it calmly as a man who had endured 2 tours in Afghanistan and years of rejection, due to his limp, already knew how such scripts played out, except this time he was not alone. Emma's small voice called out his name as she ran across the grass, ignoring Patricia's furious orders to return. Marcus bent to greet her with a smile, asking how she was, and she answered brightly that she had told her mother about him, and that her mother had said he must be a very special person. Patricia stormed across the lawn furious that rules were being broken and staff were daring to engage with residents, but Emma clutched Marcus's hand and answered simply that he was her friend, which made Patricia's face grow even redder with rage. Patricia's voice rose with fury as she declared that friendship was nonsense and warned that Emma had no idea where Marcus came from or what kind of person he truly was. Marcus stood slowly but kept Emma's small hand in his own and said calmly that she was right. Emma knew nothing about him, just as Patricia herself did not. The steadiness in his tone unsettled her, for there was authority there that clashed with his role as a gardener. When Victoria appeared, Patricia rushed to involve her, demanding a conversation about Emma's behavior toward the staff. But Victoria's expression was unreadable. In the 2 days since Emma had spoken, she had barely slept, consumed by a need to learn who Marcus truly was. As the CEO of one of the largest assistive technology companies, she understood that children suffering from selective mutism often required years of therapy before regaining speech. Yet Marcus had broken through in minutes. Ignoring Patricia, Victoria greeted him warmly, remarking that Emma had not stopped talking about him. Emma ran a few steps away to demonstrate how Marcus had taught her to run on the soft grass to avoid hurting her feet, her laughter filling the air. Victoria looked at Marcus with growing curiosity and asked if he knew about botany, and he answered modestly that he knew a little and that gardening helped him stay calm. Patricia interrupted in outrage, insisting the rules prohibited staff from fraternizing with residents, but Victoria's cold replies silenced her. Emma had not spoken in 3 years, she said, and if Marcus had helped her, then she encouraged his presence rather than forbade it. Patricia's face drained of color as she accused him of ulterior motives, but Victoria's eyes studied him closely. She noticed his posture, the constant scanning of his surroundings, the scars partly hidden by his collar, and the precise way he spoke as though trained to remain calm under pressure. She asked if he had worked with children before, and Marcus replied enigmatically that he had worked with many people who needed to find their voice. In that instant, Victoria understood two things with absolute clarity: that Marcus was not a simple gardener, and that Patricia had underestimated him gravely. Neither woman could know that the truth about Marcus would soon shatter every assumption they held. That same afternoon, Marcus did something he had not done in 5 years. He picked up the phone and called Washington, D.C. His voice was steady yet carried a hint of vulnerability as he introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Thompson and requested his full military records. On the other end, Colonel Davidson fell silent before asking where Marcus had been, explaining that they had been trying to reach him since he left the hospital years earlier. Standing in his small shared apartment, Marcus admitted he had been trying to find himself, but now needed to prove who he truly was after facing job troubles and discrimination. He asked for his medical certificates, decorations, and especially the mission report from Kandahar. Another silence hung before the colonel answered in awe, reminding Marcus that he had saved 17 Afghan children from a bomb hospital and performed emergency surgery for 14 hours under fire, calling him one of the nation's greatest surgeons and a decorated war hero. Marcus listened quietly and admitted that none of that seemed real when people looked at him and saw only a troublesome black gardener. The colonel promised to send everything immediately and urged Marcus to remember who he really was. Meanwhile, at the Meadowbrook Hills condominium, Patricia Whitmore was presiding over what she considered the most important meeting of her career as president of the Residents Association. In her immaculate living room, she sat surrounded by 5 other elite women from the community, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups as she spoke with the authority of someone who had never been truly challenged. "Ladies, we must grasp the gravity of the situation," she declared. "A disruptive element has infiltrated our community, and now Victoria Richardson, our most influential neighbor, is defending him." Margaret Thornton, the mayor's wife, shook her head gravely and remarked that Marcus looked suspiciously at women and children. Patricia pressed her advantage, tapping her spoon against her cup and insisting that Victoria was blinded by family troubles since her daughter was different and unable to speak normally, making her vulnerable to manipulation. Catherine Blackwell, heiress to an oil fortune, laughed and said people like him always exploited weaknesses. Surely he had already marked Victoria as a target. Patricia scribbled notes furiously on her pad, vowing to document every infraction, every inappropriate interaction, every time he strayed from staff areas, and even to hire a private investigator if needed. What none of them knew was that Marcus had survived environments where lives depended on reading every whisper and every movement, where his combat tours had sharpened his perception into something lethal. The next morning, Marcus arrived with something besides his tools, a small recorder and a smartphone that Victoria had left behind, intentionally programmed to capture conversations. Emma ran to him as always, and Victoria followed with determination. She asked Marcus about medicinal plants, ignoring the disapproving glances of the women nearby. Marcus smiled and said knowledge was like a seed that could grow anywhere. Just then, Patricia marched in with 2 other women carrying a briefcase and camera, loudly declaring she was documenting yet another breach of protocol. Marcus straightened, and Victoria was struck by how different he looked when he assumed his full height, commanding and authoritative in a way no gardener should have been. He asked Patricia calmly what specific protocol he was violating by politely answering a resident. For a moment she faltered, startled by his tone and articulate language, then accused him of interacting inappropriately with residents like Victoria and Emma. Marcus pressed further, asking her to specify what kind of people those were. Patricia stammered, realizing she had been cornered into exposing her prejudice. She weakly insisted it was about rules and order, but Marcus requested to see those rules in writing so he could comply. Victoria realized in that instant that Marcus was far more intelligent than anyone there understood, and that Patricia had stumbled into a game she was not equipped to play. Frustrated and humiliated, Patricia hissed in a low, but still audible voice that people like him might fool a naive, but she knew exactly what he was and what he intended. Marcus smiled. Not the smile of a man humbled, but of a strategist who had just been handed ammunition. Victoria felt a chill knowing that Patricia had no idea she had walked straight into a trap. Within 24 hours, the hierarchy of the condominium would be upended, and the arrogance of these women would become their undoing. 2 days later, Patricia convened an emergency residence meeting in the event hall, packed with 23 families, including Victoria, who arrived with Emma and a briefcase that drew a discreet smile from Marcus as soon as he saw it. Patricia took the floor with a voice laden with artificial authority, announcing that the community faced an extremely serious security issue. "We have an individual in our community who poses a potential threat to our family," Patricia declared from the front of the packed condominium hall, while Marcus sat quietly in the back row still in his gardener's uniform, though his posture was anything but ordinary. His shoulders were square, his eyes alert, scanning the room with the precision of someone who had long been trained to assess danger. Patricia spoke of her documentation, accusing Marcus Thompson of repeated protocol violations from inappropriate interactions with children to suspicious behavior. Margaret Thornton stood up, brandishing a folder announcing that a private investigator had looked into Marcus's past, and Catherine Blackwell added gleefully that though his criminal record was clean, his military history showed psychological scars, PTSD injuries, and supposed psychiatric treatment clearly unstable. She concluded Victoria watched him carefully, expecting anger or shame, yet what she saw was amusement, as if he were watching a play whose ending he already knew. Patricia then called for a vote of immediate dismissal and banishment, and 17 hands shot up before Marcus slowly rose to his feet and the room fell silent. He asked in a commanding voice if he might clarify some of the incorrect information presented. Patricia snapped that he had no right to speak, as he was only an employee. Marcus nodded respectfully, but walked forward each step controlled and authoritative, his limp barely visible. He produced an envelope and began by addressing his record, explaining that the investigator had done an incomplete job. He revealed documents declaring him Dr. Marcus Thompson, combat surgeon, United States Army, decorated with 2 Bronze Stars for valor, a military medical medal of honor, and a presidential citation for exceptional service. He described how during his last tour in Afghanistan, he had performed 17 emergency surgeries on wounded children, working 14 hours under enemy fire and saving them. All the hall was suffocating with silence. Patricia tried to object, stammering, but Marcus gently pulled out a digital recorder and pressed play, filling the hall with her own voice as she sneered about people like him planning scams and blackmail. He played more recordings exposing Margaret's words about his supposed behavior and Catherine's scornful remarks about manipulating vulnerable families. The women turned pale, shifting in their chairs. Marcus smiled thinly and handed the microphone to Victoria, who stood with fury and conviction. She explained that for 5 days she had observed her daughter with Marcus and reminded them that Emma had not spoken in 3 years despite $500,000 spent on treatment. Within 2 minutes of speaking to Marcus, her daughter said her first word, and since then had laughed, talked, and played again. Victoria revealed her own investigation, proving that Marcus was a Johns Hopkins graduate, a child trauma specialist who had worked at a top pediatric hospital before enlisting, and that his so-called instability was simply 3 months of voluntary therapy after the loss of a close friend. Patricia attempted to interject, but Victoria overpowered her voice with relentless authority. Marcus then addressed the assembly once more, explaining that he worked as a gardener, not for lack of qualifications, but because hospitals in the city refused to see past color of his skin and his veteran status. He revealed that Victoria had offered him a new position as director of human development at her company with a $250,000 salary starting Monday. He looked directly at Patricia and said the only thing he had planned was kindness toward a child in need, and that everything else was a result of their own prejudice and choices. He finished by stating that every recording had been captured in public spaces, and that every malicious assumption, every prejudiced word, and every attempt to humiliate him was now documented forever. Victoria rose once more, her voice firm and clear, as she declared that in her new capacity as legal advisor to the community, she was informing Patricia Whitmore, Margaret Thornton, and Catherine Blackwell that they were being sued for racial discrimination, defamation, and harassment, and that every recording gathered will be delivered to the district attorney. Before the end of the day, Patricia's face darkened in fury as she shouted that they could not do this because they were respected members of the community, only for Marcus to correct her